It's the Political Free Agents podcast, and we're back for our Wednesday episode. Interested in this one because, hey, it hits tech. And this is, if you didn't know, I'm a real big nerd. So talking tech is always something that I'm interested in doing, and it's something that I've long enjoyed to dive into. And so we're going to talk about what's going on with Google and this whole antitrust monopoly talk with Google. With the government and the lawsuit that they're bringing against Google there. So that one's pretty interesting to me. So we'll dig into that one. There was something just came across my my desk, like I'm at a news desk, right? So something just came across the desk. It's silly. You pick up these little nuances from like listening to people on TV, and it becomes part of the way you speak. But yeah, nothing came across the desk. I got a notification on my phone about the Pope, and I thought I would kind of start with this one. And this is I'm reading off of Axios here, but it says the Pope, quote, "I stood up for that," and Pope Francis voices support for same-sex civil unions. So I know this is not going to settle well with the religious crowd. Like it's just not. Um, and but depending on where you land on this, like it has nothing to do with you, right? Like if you're not in a same-sex civil union scenario or situation, it has nothing to do with you. Like, are you going to be like have that same energy for people who are lying, right? Because you're not supposed to do that, right? What about coveting somebody's wife? You got the same energy for that? Like, where are your energies expelled? And I find it interesting that for a lot of religious people, there's a lot of energy spent on same-sex issues, no matter what it is, gay marriage or transgender issues, things like that. Like there's a lot of energy spent on that, but not a lot on all these other sins. Like, people gonna do what people gonna do, right? Like you get these justifications, but with same-sex marriage, it's like, no, you're vile. You need to stop. We need something in place to stop you from doing this thing that has nothing to do with me, right? So it's interesting. I always like seeing the fallout from this sort of thing. Now, if you're talking to somebody and as a Christian or whatever, if you're talking to them and they're struggling with this and they're wanting to stop, cool. Like if that's not who they want to be or whatever the case may be, okay, right? Then you can help them, give them scripture or whatever it is. But I'm specifically speaking about how people tend to excoriate people for something that has nothing to do with them, but not in other cases. Anyway, the same line as I do with politics. It's about the hypocrisy of certain things. And so here's what the Pope was saying. He said, we have to create, what we have to create is a civil union law. That way they are legally covered. Now this is interesting. Okay, I'll come back to that because I'm watching West Wing, which is taking back to the 90s, and they're dealing with some same-sex things, and so it's kind of interesting to kind of time travel, quote unquote, in that case. And so what Pope was saying in the title was when he said I stood up for that, he was referring to his reported endorsement for or of same-sex civil unions while he was the Archbishop of Buenos Aires. He said, homosexuals have a right to be part of the family. They're children of God and have a right to a family. Nobody should be thrown out or be made miserable because of that, he says. Interesting. You mean they're still children of God, even though what you deem them to be doing as being, blasphemous, quote unquote? So, this is like a novel idea, right? Like, these are children of God who still deserve our love and God's love. It's weird that that's news, right? That as believers, that shouldn't be a big deal, but it is. It says, according to the AP, Juan Carlos Cruz, the Chilean survivor of clergy sexual abuse and one of the film's main actors, said the Pope assured him in 2018 that God made Cruz gay. Pope Francis also addresses the environment, poverty, migration, inequality, and discrimination in film. And so this is part of a documentary. I don't think I mentioned that earlier, but it's part of a documentary. And so back in, like, this also isn't real news, because back in 2013, he said, if someone is gay and he searches for the Lord and has goodwill, who am I to judge? And people lost their everlasting mind. Like, they just couldn't believe that that was the case, that the Pope was saying that, who am I to judge? Right? Like, we're not supposed to be the judge. People use that in other ways. They'll justify their actions and say, only God can judge me. But then they see somebody that's gay and they're like, oh, you are, sinning against God. So anyway, you have to really consider the humanity. And this is what I tell my kids. This is my barometer for how I view, from a legal sense, some of these issues. Mind you, I'm not a lawyer, but from legal and political sense, if, like, switch gay and black, and prior to loving, the ruling that made it, think about it, loving, mind you, what year was that? Let me get the exact year that loving came about. But prior to loving, it was actually illegal for black people and white people to get married. So at that point, and apologize, the doorbell is going off. But prior to that, the loving ruling was what made it okay. They made it legal for black people and white people to get married. You could go to jail. You could spend time in jail. You could lose your, um, years of your life doing that, because it was illegal for that to happen. And so loving happens, and now all of a sudden, that was loving happened in 1958, is whenever the couple got married. Richard and Mildred Loving said they fell in love in 1998. And so that was, sorry, distractions here with this door. Uh, that's what happens when people get locked out of the house. Uh, so many distractions. 1 second. Okay. All right. So when Loving actually came about, like I said, there's a movie about it, but essentially that's what ended up leading up to the court case, Loving versus Virginia, and that kind of led to, that was actually decided in 1967. Right. So that ended up making it legal for me to exist, 12 years later. So those, it's kind of interesting because, like, in South Africa, it was kind of the same thing where you ended up having a, Trevor Noah said he was Born a Crime was the name of his book, because it was like, is illegal for him to exist as a mixed kid, mixed white and black, in South Africa at that time. And so that's, just weird to think of. But anyway, I use that as a barometer to think, all right, so in terms of same-sex marriage, there was a time where it was thought to be a blasphemy. It was against God and all these other things to have a white person and a black person married. And in a relationship, you could be killed, by whoever decided they wanted to kill you because of this. You could lose your business, your livelihood, go to jail. All these sort of things could happen. There was a movie I just watched. I'll look up the name because I forget the name of it, but there was a movie I just watched, and there was the son of Matthew McConaughey was in there. It was the son of a white man who ended up falling in love with a black woman. This was during the Civil War time, Reconstruction, all that sort of thing. And he basically ended up becoming, or the wife was very light skinned, very pale, or about my color, I guess you could say. Mix that with a white man, and you get a baby who has some black features, but not necessarily doesn't necessarily look black. Like skin is very light, looks white, but has bigger lips, bigger nose, sort of thing, and it's not very clear uh, if they're black. And so he was able to pass off as white, but then they end up finding out that, oh, he was a black man, and so his marriage was a problem, right? Because you can't have these black people marrying these white women, right? And so Free State of Jones is what it is, which was a really good movie. I didn't know that it actually um, came out a few years back, like 2016. I hadn't even heard of it prior to that. But it's about a guy named Newton Knight, and so Newton Knight's son, anyway, basically Newton Knight's son was in court for being 1%. The one drop rule basically meant that he was a black man and he couldn't marry a white woman. And so they gave him 5 years in prison, ended up being annulled. And, it's a book. It's, the movie is out. It's a really good movie. So I look at things in that case. So for same-sex marriage, is it such a big deal to me that a man marries a man or a woman marries a woman? Is it that big of a deal for me? It has no bearing on me, my marriage, my family, or my kids. Right? Now, what if it was a black man and a white woman, or vice versa? If you just go back 50 years, that's the same conversation we're having today about same-sex marriage. Is that it was illegal. You couldn't do it. You didn't have benefits. Basically, you don't deserve this sort of family in that same familial unit. Now, I don't think the government should be dictating that. I just don't. If there's something that you want to discuss from a morality standpoint or religious standpoint, by all means, do so. That's up to you. You can carry on the way you want to carry on, right? It's your area, your universe in that case. But the government shouldn't be dictating that aspect, right? That's not something the government should be doing. And the government has been on the wrong side of history for centuries now, the US government specifically, relating to these sort of matters. So it's interesting that the Pope came out in that way. And I haven't checked for any backlash, but I'm sure there will be plenty of backlash on that. And there may be some from what I just said, but we shall see. All right. So, little back history. If you are older than 20, now let's give you if you're over 30, 35, you grew up in an era where Microsoft was reigning supreme, and then not so much so. And the reason why that largely happened was because of the government. The government came in and said, hey, you are unfairly monopolizing this specific area of the computer industry. And monopolies are illegal. So you can't do that. You can't do it. So the ruling with Microsoft was you have to break up. And so you got to break apart these businesses. You got to separate this thing. You got to do that. And what it all boiled down to was Microsoft came out with Microsoft, I guess it was 95 when it first really kind of like skyrocketed. Microsoft, or excuse me, Windows 95. Microsoft, um, excuse me, Windows 3.1 was different. It was decent. It had a graphical user interface, mouse, move, click, do things, as opposed to having to type commands and stuff like that. So Windows 3.1 was a huge hit. That's where things kind of started taking off. And then come Windows 95, it was around, well, I mean, 95, it was around 95. But it was around the time where the internet was really starting to pick up. So the internet had been there, like you had been able to communicate on like message. You would think of it kind of like a Reddit, let's just say. Like you had these areas you could go and you could communicate with people on these forums, sort of things. And so that was cool. But now you had pictures, video, like live chat, not like post something and wait, but it was like AOL, like doo doo, you've got mail, and all of a sudden emails flying around. Like it was a big deal. Well, how were people getting to the internet? Well, Mac wasn't really taking off like gangbusters. The Mac kind of has always ruled around 10% of the market, right? So, excuse me, it wasn't bringing in that many, you know, new visitors to the internet in the large scheme of market share. So you most likely were on Windows, and it's still true today, right? The Mac, they may be at, I don't know, 15% now or more, because a lot of developers use them, but Windows is the number one operating system. Well, what came on Windows by default? Internet Explorer. Every computer that you bought that had Microsoft Windows on it came with Internet Explorer. It was baked in. Technically, Internet Explorer, if you go and you open up Windows Explorer and you go view a file, look at your folders, your directories, things like that, that was basically Internet Explorer. Internet Explorer was the exact same thing because you could click on your address bar in Explorer, type in HTTP and some other stuff, and boom, you were on the internet. Or vice versa. You could be on your computer, on the internet, and you could type in a local address and boom, you're looking at your local files. So it was one and the same in that sense. So it wasn't that big of a deal, right? It was useful. It was available. Anybody could do it. And so those things became de facto, right? So you had Netflix. You had Netscape back in the day. You had all these other browsers who were trying to make it, like trying to be number one. And Netscape was one of the biggest. Well, then now the operating system by default has Internet Explorer. It is the default browser for you. So that ended up becoming the de facto standard. And now everybody was on IE, and that became an issue. And so what they said was Microsoft is unfairly limiting the ability for other people to make money on Windows. And the problem with that was, well, for me at least, was, well, it's their operating system. Like coupling IE on Windows makes sense, right? From a strategic standpoint, if I'm selling you software, I shouldn't have to leave a feature out so I can make sure you have some success inside of my software, right? Like I didn't block you. I didn't keep people from doing it. I have a product that people are comfortable with. They believe it is superior enough to not, or it is good enough to not move on to the other browsers or whatever that may be. But if you can make a better one, then make one. Okay. So fast forward, they get broken up. The stock plummets, which I wish I would have bought when it was at 20. I told myself to get some, but it would stock drop to like, I think 28 or 25 or something. It was crazy. And this was Microsoft, who was the like Apple of those days, basically, with all the cash in the world and all these sort of things. So now Google comes about. Google had the search engine. The search engine that they built turned out to be better. You had back in the day Alta Vista and all these other search engines that were out there. They were relevant. You could use them. Google came in and was like, oh, we have a better way. They built a better mousetrap. And now all of a sudden, Google is the #1 search engine in the world. So that's just the way business goes, right? So of course, whenever you do that, uh, what happens is the products expand, right? So you're not just a search engine. Now you're looking at building phones. Around 05, 06, they start working on Android. Then they have something going, and then Apple comes out with iPhone, and they're like, oh, we want to do this differently. So they kind of shift Android a little bit into being a little bit more like iOS. So now they're dealing with phones, and they had already got Chrome that they had released. So Google Chrome's a new browser. What do you think comes default on Chrome? Google is the default search engine. Okay. So they built the best search engine. Then they came out and built the best browser. And then to all my iPhone users out there, they built the best operating system for mobile devices. You're welcome. Come on home. Come on home. Come on over to Android. Set yourself free. All right. So they built all these things. And of course, they built an operating system. We're right back to the Microsoft thing. They built an operating system called Android. Well, technically, they bought it and then they refined it. So Android was, I don't know if you remember, but T-Mobile had a like a two-way sort of pager in a sense. And there was operating system, I believe it was called Danger, I think. And basically the people who built the Danger operating system, they were the ones who were actually working on Android that Google bought. So it wasn't actually Google that built it, just like Apple didn't build Siri, they bought Siri, integrated it, that sort of thing. That's just how those things go. But they built the best they built the best search engine. Then they built a browser. Then they redefined what email looked like with Gmail, right? If you don't remember how email was back in the day, Google's email, spam protection, all of that was a complete game changer. Then they redefined managing and editing documents by doing that online. Then they did the Google Sheets, and then the PowerPoint. Basically, they created Google Slides, right? They created all these web-based technologies that enable people to not have to buy into what was the #1 Office, suite available, which was called Microsoft Office, right? Microsoft Office, when it first came out, it wasn't the #1. You had Microsoft Works, right? Like there were, or excuse me, not Microsoft Works, but what was the name of it? Anyway, it was called Works. And so basically you have something. If you can build a better mousetrap, you build it, you become #1, right? The problem is Google has become too good at these products. They're #1 in search, and people are like, well, they own the search market. Some people are saying you need to give us the secret sauce. You need to tell people how you did this. And their search algorithm is called PageRank. They want Google to literally give up the recipe, right? Like imagine if you built you made some ribs, a hamburger, a salad, whatever, some sauce, and it was the best sauce. Everybody bought it de facto. Nobody else bought anything else. And then the government came in and said, you're stifling competition. You have a monopoly. You need to give up your recipe so other people can make it. That's basically what they're trying to do with the search engine, right? But the problem is, and this is, I don't discount what Google or what the government can do to force Google to break up or change their practices or give up their recipe, basically. Because they have unlimited resources, they can choose to do whatever they want to do. And there's not much Google can do, you know, but try to fight it on the legal sense. But uh, it's the government. Even Google's going to have trouble fighting that, right? It's a big problem when they come down on you like that. So I don't discount that aspect, but from a standing perspective, you don't have to use Google Chrome. It's not the default on any operating system except for Android and Chrome OS, which is Google's two operating systems. But it's on there by default. It is the software that you can use, but you can install something else. You want to? Go ahead. They don't stop you at all. By default, your search engine is Google on Chrome. You want to change it? No problem. Change it. You're free to do so. Nothing stops you from doing so. So if you don't like their products, they're not built, they don't, like Chrome OS is picked up a lot of steam and a good amount of market share. Those are Chromebooks, right? You see them in schools and things like that. You can still go out and do, like, customize them, do other things. You can install certain software on it, but you also don't have to use Chrome OS. You can get Windows computers for just about as cheap as a Chromebook. Not as cheap, but you can get lower quality hardware basically, and you can match a Chromebook. And then you can have Internet Explorer, or Microsoft Edge now as it's called. You can have Firefox. You can get Safari. It's your world. Install and do what you want to do, right? You don't want to go to google.com and search, go to DuckDuckGo. It's out there. It works well. They don't track you. None of that sort of stuff. Go to DuckDuckGo. You have MSN. You search on there. Yahoo. Yahoo's still around. Yahoo's been a search engine for over 20 something years, maybe 24 years, 25. Yahoo was there when, and kind of leading before Google took over with, their search engine. So the point is, like, you have choices. Monopolies are only evil because they tell us they're evil. That's really what it all boils down to. It's evil because they say that's illegal. You can't do that. But I pulled this up. So I want to go through some of these just so you can understand that there's nothing wrong with a monopoly. It's only a problem when you're unfairly forcing competition out. That's the only problem. If you're manipulating the market to make sure that no one else has a chance, now you have a problem. That's an issue, right? So if I make the best chairs in all of the country, and I have the #1 chair maker in all of the country, and I buy all of the wood and there's no more wood available for anybody else, but I'm not using it. I just bought up all the stock, all the supply, so nobody else can buy any wood. Now I have a monopoly that I'm manipulating the market to force people out. But this happens all the time, right? Not just in this case of people buying up everything, but this is why things like internet and spectrum, for tech companies like T-Mobile, things like that. Like, they need spectrum to operate on the airwaves. Think of it like that. So with the spectrum, with all that, they if they could own all of it, they would, without a shadow of a doubt. But that's a good thing that has been split up, and now they have to bid it out and have to sell it and these sort of things. There's rules around that aspect, right? So those things are good. Unfair business practices are something that should be protected against. Okay, so here's some monopolies that you don't see the government go after. So banking is monopolized through the Federal Reserve Central Bank. And that regulates, and I'm just reading here, this is from the Mises Institute, so Mises.org. So banking is monopolized through the Federal Reserve Central Bank that regulates the banks and favors big over small banks, especially when controlling interest rates through the buying and selling of bonds from and to the big banks, respectively. Housing, 15% is monopolized through Fannie and Freddie Home Mortgage Duopoly and Federal Housing Administration, the FHA, that finance and promote larger homes and urban sprawl, while local politicians favor real estate developer cronies. Healthcare, 18% is monopolized through state licensure laws restricting the supply of doctors and other health professionals. This is according to Milton Friedman, certificate of need laws limiting the supply of hospitals, government encouraged corporate buyer monopolies, and federal drug, patent, and other intellectual properties. Agriculture, 8% is monopolized through subsidies favoring traditional crops and monopoly selling inputs for and outputs from these crops, including seeds, e.g. GMO, corporate monoculture farms, and junk food processors. These subsidies discourage the development of alternative crops, diversified family farms, and healthier foods. Subsidized crop exports traded by international conglomerates have been rendering agriculture uncompetitive in the developing world. Energy, 12% is monopolized through U.S. government-controlled OPEC oil cartel, while U.S. electricity and natural gas markets are controlled by territorial utility monopolies. The utility monopolies conduct rigged bidding of power supplies favoring cronies. The U.S. also creates energy monopolies by picking winners and losers among fuel types. Big oil and gas receives preferential exemptions from environmental regulations for fracking. The natural gas byproduct of oil fracking is favored over otherwise lower cost coal in baseload electricity markets and for backing up favored wind and solar energy, so on and so on. They continue going. Transportation, 10% is monopolized through government regulations, including bailouts, favoring the big three automakers and airport favoritism for the four major airlines. Technology, 8% is monopolized through patent and copyright laws, while regulated territorial franchises are awarded to local telephone, internet, and cable monopolies. Government, 13% has created public monopolies through dominant federal, state, local funding, especially education. Who can supply your education? All right, if your kids don't go to school, right? Like this is something, your kids have to go to school, right? They either have to be in a public school, you have to pay for a school. You could also go to a charter school, right? You could do homeschool, but your kids have to go to school. So they dictate you have to go to school. Then they tax you and take your money to fund the public schools. Then based on that funding, you don't have another choice to say, I want my kids to go to this public school. Well, that you've already been taxed, right? I want to go to this other public school, right? This is the whole idea of like the voucher program that Betsy DeVos has been pushing and things like that, right? They want to give people credit so that they can use that money to go to other places, right? There's completely different conversation there. But the idea of I'm going to tax you, you can go to our public school. I'm going to tax you for the schools. You can go to our public schools, which are the de facto throughout any state and county and city in this country. You can go there. Otherwise, you need to foot the bill yourself. We already took your money to help pay for it, but you can foot the bill yourself to pay for them to go to another school, or you can teach them yourself at home, but we're still going to take the money from you, right? They have a monopoly on education. There's not a competing body for public education in this country. There's not. You can't say no, don't take my tax money. I'm going to send that money over to, whatever, education system. I'm going to try this competing education system. You can't do that. You have to pay your taxes that go towards paying for these schools, right? You have to, but you can't pull it out and go somewhere else. So those are just things from what the government does that is monopolistic, but at the same time, they, you know, they want to make companies break up for having the best product, arguably, um, and having a quote unquote monopoly on certain things like search. Same thing goes for social media. And we're going to dig into the case here in a sec, but the same thing goes for uh, social media. All right. People say it's a big deal that Twitter blocked the Hunter Biden story and Facebook. You don't like it, go use Parler. It's their platform, right? Like, where do we get like the idea that you are owed the ability to do whatever you want to do on a platform that you pay $0 for, right? You get served ads that helps pay for these things. And these things cost hundreds of thousands of dollars just to serve up this content that you want every year, right? Like for years, I think it was maybe a decade, Twitter was not even profitable. I don't even know if they're profitable now. They finally found an avenue to start making money, but they were just sinking money into this, right? Like you feel like you deserve to tweet anything you want. You can say what you want about free speech and that sort of thing, but you're free to create your own website. Go to WordPress.com, go to Wix.com, go anywhere, Squarespace, go to any of these sites, create your own site, put it out there. The problem is you want to be where everybody else is. And you feel entitled. You're entitled to seeing the content that you want to see. But if the story that they blocked was kiddie porn, maybe you would have been like, yeah, good job, Twitter. But because you wanted this story about Hunter Biden out, oh, now it's a problem. We need to get Twitter and Facebook on Capitol Hill. You're not entitled. You're not entitled to do what you want to do on these platforms. You don't own them. You may own some stock. Buy more stock, become the majority shareholder. Now you can make a decision. But until then, stop complaining about free stuff that you get. You're getting it for free. Stop complaining because they didn't serve up some article that you wanted to read. It's up to them. And by the way, there's a PFA minutes coming out. I'm giving away pretty much all of that, digging into that a little bit more. But the idea of Google makes it unfair for other search engines because, well, in my summation, in the way that they're saying it, they're too good. It makes it unfair. It's hard for other people to enter the industry. It was hard back when Google started. It wasn't easy back then just because it was new. Yahoo was dominating. They came out with a better mousetrap. So it's okay for the government to have all these monopolies, but it's not okay for you. So here's what, and I'm reading here from Axios. This is the US versus Google. The siege begins. Says the Justice Department fired the starter pistol on what's likely to be a years-long legal siege of big tech by the U.S. government when it filed a major antitrust suit Tuesday against Google. Now, they say a years-long. I wouldn't be surprised if this thing went multi-year. Wouldn't be surprised at all. So we've talked about Axios before. Axios gives you the big picture, why it matters, and some details, right? So I'm going to read off these sections here. The big picture. Once a generation, it seems federal regulators decide to take on a dominant tech company. 2 decades ago, Microsoft was the target. 2 decades before that, IBM. It says, yes, but Tuesday fight takes place on a very different landscape. Unlike Microsoft in the 90s, Google is only one of a quintet of giant companies, including Facebook, Apple, and Amazon, and still Microsoft, all competing across a broad landscape involving online ads, search media, e-commerce, workplace communication, social networking, voice, and AI. Here's why it matters. Lawmakers, experts, and critics have warned with increasing alarm over the past decade that these companies' unprecedented concentration of power threatens competition, free speech, consumer choice, and user privacy. The Google suit presents the biggest US effort yet to rein in that power, following significant moves by the EU. Here's the details. The suit by the DOJ and 11 states accuses Google of using anti-competitive tactics to illegally monopolize the online search and search advertising markets using exclusionary deals with phone makers and other tactics to lock in its search as a default. The suit asks for a structural relief, which could mean an effort to break up Google in some way. Now, quick sidebar before I read the other part. Google kind of got ahead of this not long ago because they split things up already. So Google used to be the company that was behind all of these products. Well, now there's a company called Alphabet. Alphabet sits over Google and they have other subsidiaries, right? So they're suing Google. I don't know if they're trying to target, I didn't read the actual case, but I don't know if they're trying to target Alphabet at all. But Alphabet is the company that owns Google search, right? Alphabet is the parent of the subsidiary Google. And I believe Nest is still operating as a separate business. So it's Google Nest, Google. Well, here, actually, let me look up while I go through this, who all Alphabet Inc. owns. But they're on the stock market as ABC. And so their site is abc.xyz, which is funny. I have a friend who used to use the XYZ domain. They actually don't give you anything. They're not giving me anything on the site. It's just the home page and an investors page that goes through and breaks down. But yeah, so anyway, they invest in other companies too, but I believe it's Google, YouTube, and some others that they kind of split up in different ways. So them going after Alphabet in and of itself seems like they may be aiming at the wrong company. I mean, excuse me, Google, not Alphabet. They may be aiming at the wrong company because Alphabet is the one that owns all of these and has their tentacles in these other companies. So we'll see what Sundar Pichai and those guys, he's the CEO of Google. We'll kind of see how they navigate this thing. But here's the other part of it. So for its part, Google says it's got plenty of competition, which they do. And the government has failed to make a case that its actions have harmed consumers, most of whom never pay a penny for Google services. Right. Like that's a key thing. You can sign up for Gmail for free, Google Drive, where you get sheets, docs, the slides, and all the like drawings. They have just a myriad of products up there that they pay for themselves, they build themselves, that you can get for free. You don't pay a dime. Google Chrome, don't pay a dime. Android's out there. You can download it, install it, and put it on anything that you want, right? Like these things are available for free. So how do you say that they're unfairly controlling a market, that they're giving away things for free? Or excuse me, how are they, because you can control a market, but how are you harming consumers if you're giving this stuff away for free, right? So it's going to be interesting to see how the government kind of makes that case. So it says, it's the Be Smart section. Antitrust cases can take years. Yeah, that's what I was saying. I think it take years here. Can take years to resolve if the government and accused company can't agree on a settlement. And many uncertainties hang over the case. The Justice Department prosecutors are careful to keep the partisan fighting over alleged bias against conservatives by Google and other tech giants out of the picture of this suit. But a change in administration come January could mean a change in DOJ's strategy. So the bottom line is courts move slowly and tech moves fast. That means antitrust enforcement often lag the marketplace. And by the time cases conclude, they barely seem relevant. For all that, in almost any timeline, you can imagine 5 or 10 years hence, Google search will still be a foundation stone of the digital world. And that in and of itself may give this lawsuit extra gravity, right? So again, this could take a long time to process, but Google's got some of the best developers in the world. And this is just not just on the Google. Those big companies, man, they have people in there that can do some amazing things. Google, Apple, Microsoft, they all can do some pretty amazing things from a coding perspective. Once the DOJ gives they kind of put out their full plan of what they're trying to target, it's not that big of a deal for Google to just go ahead and talk to their product managers and say, hey, let's tweak this. Let's tweak that. Completely take the wind out their sails. Because they can just shift. They can move. This is all online stuff. Like it's more difficult when you're building something that has to be, shipped, like a DVD or some hardware, like, that sort of thing. Those things are more difficult to move about because now you have to go process this and do it. But software moves so fast on the internet. So I don't think they really have a case here. I do believe, as it was mentioned on Axios here, this boils down to some conservative butthurt. That's just, in my opinion, that's what this boils down to. It boils down to conservatives feeling targeted and feeling like they don't have the same options as liberals, that they get shadow banned and they get all these other things that happen. YouTube is the number one, so they feel like they have to be on YouTube. They can't build up their presence anywhere else. Like all of these things they feel like is happening. And I believe they're trying to go after the Google as a part of that. When you can't say they're harming customers when it's very easy for you to just type in msn.com, yahoo.com, duckduckgo.com. You can just type these in and you can go anywhere else. You can make it your standard. You can make it your default. Feel free, right? So the only other case that they really have is with Android. This is probably Google's biggest issue in this suit. Android as an operating system, so Samsung and all these other phone manufacturers, OnePlus phones and all these, when they sign up for Android, they have to keep certain apps on there, right? So if you're using Android, the Google app has to be on there, which is basically Google search. Chrome comes on there by default. Let me see, there's a few others. So there's a few G Suite sort of things that come on there. I think Google Drive comes on there by default and a few others, but not like every Google app comes on there, but there's a few that come on there by default. And I think that's required. I think the case Google has is, well, they get it for free, right? It comes on there, but it's part of the operating system. It's part of what makes things work. If you're using Android, and back in the day, it used to not be like this. You could get Android that didn't have the Play Store. Well, it wasn't called the Play Store back then, but you could get what's called the Play Store now. You can get Android without that. But then you're looking around like, how do I install these apps? Where are my apps? I can't maneuver. I can't do this. I can't do that. And it was like Wild West type stuff, right? So it's a bad user experience, right? So they put these things on there by default. They have agreements with Samsung that says you have to have these things on here by default. And so when you get your new Samsung phone, you get these Google apps available, and now boom, you can take off and you can run and do what you want to do. There's a operating system. My father-in-law is old school. You know the old school. Got a flip phone. Blah, flap it open, flip it closed. Bah, bah. Like he loves just to being able to pop it open, talk to you. Hey, what's going on? Yep, we're doing that. All right, bah, snap it, pop it closed. So it's a running family and a joke that we got to get Paw Paw upgraded, right? We got to upgrade Paw Paw to a smartphone. We got to get him on an iPhone. Well, now the flip phone, I just helped him transfer from one flip phone to another flip phone. He just keeps buying flip phones. And mind you, they're like $15. Like it's crazy. Anyway, this flip phone is KaiOS, KAIOS. Turn it on, start it up. What do you get? You got Google Assistant, Google search is on there. I think the Play Store was on there as well. You could set up Gmail accounts, things like this. Now, mind you, this is not Android. This is just KaiOS. Well, let me rephrase. I don't know if KaiOS is Android under the hood, right? It could be, but it has those Google integrations, right? But these things are built into the OS. They're not required. You don't have to set up an account. You don't need a Google account. It's not the typical Android setup. It's their own specific setup, but you have access to Google services. So how does the government make a case that people can go in and they can pick and choose? They can use these services. They can agree to these things or not. It's up to them. They can build their own iOS if they want. I mean, OS. They don't have to use Android, right? Like KaiOS, they built their own. There's all these other ones. Tizen is a different operating system, that may or may not end up having full integration with Android. We'll see. But the point is, you don't have to use Android as a consumer. You're not being stifled. As a manufacturer, you do not have to put Android on your phone. You can't put iOS. Apple doesn't let anybody else build iOS apps or iOS phones. You want iOS, you use the iPhone. It is what it is. You want a tablet with iOS, you get an iPad. You want Mac OS, you get a Mac. It is what it is, right? Like to use the immortal words of the POTUS, the current POTUS, it is what it is. Right. So it's going to be interesting to see how they say Google is stifling and hurting consumers, because it boils down to the consumers, not giving consumers choice. And the choice is there. It's completely up to you. In fact, that's why I use Android, because you have a choice. You have a choice. You customize it. You can do what you want to do. On iOS, I can't. I have iOS devices. I got an iPad right here. Got one back there. I'm on a Mac right now. I have extra Macs around here. Like I have all the Apple products. So I know how they work and how they operate. But for my phone, I want to be able to customize. I want to do certain things that iOS doesn't let me do. So I don't use iOS for my phone. I like different types of phones. I like certain things that iPhones just don't give me. Back in the day, they used to be really small. Got a small one right here somewhere. Like this phone right here, if you're looking on video, this phone is super small in comparison to my Pixel. And that may be what you want, but that iPhone at that time was the biggest iPhone that you could get. And I wanted bigger phones. I like the bigger phones. So I use a different operating system. It is what it is, man. So just because Google is top dog in search, just because they're top dog from the standpoint of market share, doesn't mean that they're harming or stifling competition. They weren't always number one. In fact, Google Sheets and all that, still not number one. Microsoft Office is. And what did Microsoft do? They built their own online suite of tools, right? But before that, they didn't have any competition because nobody tried to take them on. Google did. And they've taken a bunch of market share from them. Same thing with Internet Explorer. It was the number one, top dog. Google came out with Chrome. Now it's like everybody uses Chrome. I used to tell people I use Chrome and they'd be like, what's that? What you mean Chrome? What's Chrome? Right? Like they didn't know what Chrome was at all. These are people who worked on computers regularly. They didn't know what Chrome was. It was this hot new thing. Right? So you had Internet Explorer and then Firefox came about, and then Firefox took off and blew up, and then it became slow and sluggish. And then all of a sudden Google came out with Chrome, and oh my God, it was amazing. Now Google Chrome has gotten a little bit slow and sluggish. It's a bit of a memory hog. And so now people are looking at other browsers. Like tech is cyclical. This is what it does, right? You have winners, you have people who are killing it, and then all of a sudden somebody comes in and they take over. That's just the way the cycle is. Nobody in tech is a winner for the entire time, and the government shouldn't be in here trying to dictate winners and losers. They just shouldn't be. When you do stuff like that, that's when you get things like Solyndra back in, what was it, 2010? I think when Obama gave them, I don't know, what was it, billions of dollars or something, hundreds of millions of dollars, whatever he gave them. And that business venture ended up dying. We shouldn't have the government involved in controlling these businesses. We just shouldn't. Not when they're running their own monopolies. It makes no sense. So we'll see what's going on. We'll keep an eye on that. It's one that's near and dear to my heart because you work so hard to build a business and become number one, and now all of a sudden they come in and say, you're too good. You're no longer the quick and nimble company that's taking on the big man. You are the big man, so we got to knock you down some pegs. Nah, man, I just don't like that. Don't have enough time to dig in, but that's the same concept that I think about when I think about Joe Biden's tax plan of raising the business taxes 7% up to 28%. Same concept. Nah, man, you don't have to harm the businesses. Just improve the taxes for the little people, right? Just take the taxes for the little people and reduce our taxes. Keep the business there. Reduce our taxes as opposed to trying to raise taxes to do something. Maybe fix government spending. Maybe that's something we should do as opposed to raising taxes on people or on companies. Anyway, maybe I just think different. Maybe you do too, because you tune in to the Political Free Agents, and you're here because we are the best podcast on the internet. There's no other place you can find content like this. There's nothing at all. There's nowhere else that you can find this content. I'm telling you, we have a monopoly on it. It's unfair that we control this much of the market. Our little 0.00001% of the market that we own is unfair. So I'm looking forward to the government coming in and knocking us down 5 or 6 pegs. So we'll see. We are the Political Free Agents. I want to pub Jason Stapleton's book again, The Nomadic Wealth Formula. It's a blueprint for generating predictable and sustainable wealth from anywhere on the earth. So along the lines of the government controlling what you do, what you have access to, and all these sort of things, the Nomadic Wealth Formula is specifically about trying to get you to be able to move freely about this world. Don't be beholden to the government. The government should be beholden to us, but that flipped a while back. And so we need to take back control. We need to make our wealth nomadic. And so go to nomadicwealth.com. It's not a long book. You can get it $9.95, $1.49 on Kindle, it looks like, but it's not a big book at all. quick, easy read for those of you that like to read. So definitely suggest checking it out. And let's just live above the fray that the government has put in front of us. So we do this thing twice a week, Sundays, 2 p.m., Wednesdays, 7 p.m. I keep saying broken record. We're moving to Tuesdays one day, but not today. Or not this week. So keep an eye out. But to stay in tune, go to YouTube. You can go to politicalfreeagents.com, click the link to go to our YouTube channel. Hit like, hit subscribe. I do see that our grower count is increasing. So that's awesome. We've seen a 50% increase this last week. So keep sharing it out, keep pushing it. But most importantly, hit like and hit subscribe. It'll help boost the numbers, help get this message out. Also, hit us up on social media at PFA Podcast on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. We'll catch you on Sunday. We're out.